Hello.
Hello, hello. How's it
Hi.
going?
Good morning.
Good morning. How's it going?
It is going well. It's so nice to see you. I can't believe that we're still in the pandemic.
I know.
I mean, honestly, the last time we saw each other and spoke, I think it was at the beginning of COVID in some ways.
Yeah, 100%. It was like, I think it was probably like just over 1 year. Was it just over a year ago?
I think it feels longer. And that's another thing too, is that just time and the passage of time has really been, totally just impacted by
100%.
COVID and all of that. How have you been? How are things by you, family, life, work? Give me the nuts and bolts.
Yeah. I gotta give you a forewarning. I'm changing the structure of my recording. So you're the first person I'm piloting this on. I just wanted to kind of have
Okay.
it start off
Ah,
recording. So it is recording right now.
I see that. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. So anything can and will be used against me. Is that
Well,
sort of the
yeah, I used to have like the little like spiel that I gave in the beginning, but I just feel like it kind of disrupted the flow of the conversation. So
Well, I
I
don't believe
guess
that
this.
my Miranda rights have been read yet, so I may need for that to happen before we continue. No, teasing.
Yeah, I no, but my life's good, man. I've been doing a lot of like home renos. That's where I've been working recently. The last couple of years, it's like a family business, and I I
Yeah.
I grew up like working with that business, and then I left for a while. I was in like the fitness industry, restaurant industry, and now I'm back here. So I feel the exact same way that you kind of said. Like time
Yeah.
has just been flying by because it's just
Yeah.
like Monday to Friday work, and then working on the podcast, and then with everything else, it's like, man, can I say
Wow.
I can edit this out if you don't like this part, but I was gonna say
We're yeah.
congratulations, man, on what's
Thank you
coming
so
up. Do you want to
much.
talk about that?
Sure, we can talk about it. It's my husband and I are expecting a our babies to be born via surrogate, and we're around 34 and a half weeks pregnant. So, it's coming. Watch what happens live. I mean, we're terrified and excited and can't wait all at the same time. And, however parents to be are supposed to feel, I don't know, but I can tell you it's a mixed bag for us, but we can't wait, and we're over the moon and so blessed and grateful for this opportunity. So we shall see.
That's beautiful, man. I
Thank you.
Another thing that I started recently, I have a little group on like WhatsApp where we just talk about like mental health, and we have like these
Yeah.
discussions. It's like but I had a Zoom call this morning with everybody, and we were talking a lot about kind of like purpose in life, or just kind of feeling like there's a reason to go through like kind of like the grind or the suffering or whatever, like the hardships. And I think that just being a parent or being a leader is such a big purpose in and of itself. You know what I mean?
I do. Yeah, it definitely is. It's a huge responsibility. It's a huge gift. We both, I think, definitely, I can speak for myself. I definitely had some fear of, wait a second, what worlds are we bringing this child into? And, I believe it's a world that we can really shape for the good, and where there's, a lot of wonderful human beings and a lot of incredible possibilities. And, there's been so much shit that I think we've all seen over the course of the past 2+ years, and then some. And there's also been pockets of, at least for me, just real surprise in who shows up and who's really around and there unconditionally, and, what to let go of as well. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's pretty crazy because I've been thinking that too. I was like, this kind of changes the way I feel about the world. I was like, not that I'm in any position to have any children. Like me and my girlfriend are very happy just dating the two of us. Like we're good. Our
Yeah,
situation's
enjoy
good.
it, enjoy
Yeah.
it every
Yeah.
second.
But
Yeah.
but I had that discussion with, like now that, I'm getting a little bit older, my friends are getting married, and I'm kind of watching them all grow and develop. They're becoming homeowners, etc. And then, one of my best buddies, they haven't announced it yet, so I'm not going to say anything, but um, him and his partner are expecting, and we've had that discussion where he was like, I don't feel like it's the right time to bring a kid into the world. And then like a few months later, it's like, we are, because like,
Mm,
this is the way I think that, and from his eyes, we haven't had this, follow-up discussion yet, but I think that a lot of people are viewing it like, this is the way we change it. Like, this is
mhm.
how you impact it. Children are the people that change the world.
You're 100% correct. I mean, it kind of ties into the topic that you mentioned wanting to talk a little bit about today, which, if I understood correctly, it's sort of this idea of how does need deprivation impact the ways in which we show up to the world. And so many of us have been disappointed, let down, overwhelmed, and really defeated by a lot of circumstances that have taken place on a personal level, on a political level, on a social level, on a sort of racial level. There's been so much, and the tendency is to say, you know what, let's just let's stop it. Let's draw the line right here. Let's not continue to create, to bring meaning, bring joy, bring new life and opportunity into the world. And I think it takes a lot of courage, tenacity, and maybe some stupidity too, if you will, to bring a baby into the world right now. And I'm grateful I fall into that camp.
I agree. I agree. And I always think like as well, like I think back to even just like, if I were to look at just like two generations back, like my father and my grandfather, like I can say like, when my father had kids was in the 90s, like, I mean, it wasn't that bad. So I don't really
Yeah,
feel like they had any time like that, like where they were like, I don't think this is a good time. Cause I feel like the 80s and 90s were kind of a cool
they were
time.
really great. Yeah,
but,
yeah.
but going back even further, like I always say like I have an old family in the sense that like there's always a big break in between the
Mm,
years of having a child. Like so I
mhm.
was born in 95, my dad was born in 58, and then my grandpa was born in 1913. So there's like 40
Wow,
years between each of us.
wow.
But
There was a lot of moments for, are we sure about this? And then,
yeah,
yes, a
yeah.
decisive choice.
Yeah, like I think like I like my grandpa I always think about the most, like because this guy was born pretty much right before the Great Depression in Europe. Um, and I mean, he was in Denmark when Copenhagen was occupied by Nazis in World War II. Like that was part of the reason
Wow,
they came to Canada.
right.
So like I always think I'm like, don't you think Grandpa felt that way? Like, why would I bring
Mhm,
kids into this world? Like he literally had
mhm.
his hometown invaded by Nazis.
I totally relate and understand in my family history as well. It's an incredible thing. And honestly, as a gay man in a same sex couple, I feel like it's really important, not for myself, but for future generations as well, to create more of a lens of diversity and normalcy, quite frankly, around this idea of different types of families. I mean, it was really unthought of, unheard of in many ways, and certainly, like from just a medical scientific standpoint, it wasn't possible when I was a kid to do what we're doing now. So I take it with a great sort of pledge of honor. And you and your girlfriend may have a change of tune, but enjoy every single second while it lasts. Please travel when you can, do all of it.
Yeah. Well, we can't right now.
Well, that's
But
true.
yeah, I was gonna say like
When we're ready.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was gonna say our whole like because it's different for you guys because it's being handled on a state to state level, but our whole
Right.
country is still playing pandemic, so it's kind of
Right.
like and I don't know if you heard about what's going on here, but there's a huge protest going on nationally for us right now.
Fill me in. I mean, brief, a little bit. I kind of know nuts and bolts, but what's it like on the ground for you?
Yeah. And I want to circle back to what we were just saying because I
Yes.
think that there's something really powerful there. But just to kind of give you like a fill you in on the current events here, um,
Yes.
our like the vaccine mandates just got extended, and then there's been other restrictions that have just been put in place, it's put a huge stress on the supply chain. Like I work in construction, and there's like, I went to go buy pipe the other day, and my supplier's like, I've been out for 3 weeks. And that's like before the truckers even strike, because it's so difficult for them to cross the border right now between the States and us. So it's like,
It impacts so many professions, so just projects and
and just
the
stresses, and like
stress.
it's kind of just destroying a lot of people's lives. Like you hear about, like, you know, people can't pay their bills, and they're like foreclosing homes, and you know, there's, you know, abuse in the home or
Mm,
whatever it could be. Like there's just, and so what's happened, it's pretty incredible actually. The entire nation, like the truckers have all decided that they're just going on strike, and they're all
mm.
driving to our parliament right now. Today's the day that they're supposed to arrive. So it would be the same as like if everybody in the States, just every
Wow.
trucker decided we're done. It's not every trucker, but they
It's
pretty much
enough to
decided,
really,
yeah,
yeah.
they're gonna drive out to Ottawa, which is our capital, and they're just sitting outside our parliament, and they're pretty much putting the country on siege. So it's going to be
Wow.
interesting to see how this unfolds. But
It sounds like a really, sort of gripping, important moment. And I mean, it's again just so unbelievable as you were describing the impact and influence on, just people's lives and suffering, causing meaning, forging meaning, and survival. It's a pretty powerful resource.
yeah, I think it's been stressful, and I mean, I even alluded to it when we were messaging each other. You know, I think I made a joke, and kind of in poor taste, but I was like, I bet you your business is booming right now,
Hmm.
because I just know so many people. Like, the way I think about it is like this: is I knew a lot of people that were just barely holding it together before this pandemic. They were very anxious here, and I think actually California may have a similar, just not as inflated real estate market as us.
Yeah,
So
pretty
for
bad.
young people, are like a huge fear is not being able to get a home. Like
Hmm.
it doesn't seem achievable for people for the
Hmm.
most part. What we think is like, okay, we're just going to rent for our whole lives. Like that's kind of where
Right.
everyone's at. And
Well, I mean, and I think it's founded in fact. I mean, there's so many, pieces of evidence to suggest, what, don't push yourself, don't go the extra mile, don't try. It's this idea again of the need deprivation, the continued, sort of moving of the mark, and the sense of it's impossible. I tell people all the time, we're in a world right now where you have to be rich in order to live comfortably and just sort of get by. And it's unbelievable and not sustainable. And, certain cities, areas, countries are impacted more than others. But generally speaking, it's a very different world than the world of our parents, our grandparents, for better and maybe for worse as well. And this idea of work hard and you'll get ahead, it's not only just sort of cliched, it's wildly untrue in many cases for a variety of different reasons. So I'm with you, and this is what impacts this idea of learned helplessness, this idea that no matter how much we try at something, we're not going to be able to succeed. And therefore, why try at all? It sort of influences passivity, it reduces motivation, and ultimately a will to live. And I think so many of us are up against this idea of what's the point anyway? You know?
yeah. Yeah, and I think that, and that draws back to like kind of like the purpose thing I was talking about before. Like I think that like when you have that purpose, like I know, you know, speaking to other people that, you know, I think that children, honestly, like I'm so happy that you said that this is all happening for you, because I feel like that is like, I think a parental role or like a leadership role, whether like not everybody wants to be a parent, and I understand that,
Mhm.
but just to have a leadership role, then like you could call it
Absolutely.
another term if that makes you feel more comfortable, but I mean just like
Yes.
being a leader, like teaching and having a positive impact on somebody that you're
Mhm.
watching and helping develop, like that is so
Yes.
purposeful in and of itself.
Yeah, and we can start by providing and serving that role for ourselves, really going against the grain, not being willing to succumb to the overwhelming temptation which again is founded in reality, to just say, screw it, it's not worth it. And look, I don't want to ignore the fact that there are certain socio-political, economic, racial discriminatory practices that in many ways negatively impact upon somebody's ability to meet and realize their goals. And I also believe that, there's always hope, there's always forward progress, and there's always the possibility of meaningful change if we commit to it and refuse to succumb to, the powers at large, if you will.
Yeah, I've been trying to grasp, and I just I've been really, I guess, wrestling with that idea, what you're talking about, the fact that, and I feel like this is kind of what everybody that grows up, like, especially you could make the argument, like the white male in North America, that has it easy. But I feel like to some degree, as much as I've tried denying that, like, there's truth behind it.
Yes.
I've been trying to dive into a little bit more, like, why do people start off life with like a different hand of cards? And what are we supposed to do? Like, what do we do about that? Because at the end of the day, it is a fact of life.
Yes.
And whether
there's no question,
right? Like, it's like whether it's because they're born in a different country and they don't have the privilege of living in North America here, or maybe someone that's born in North America and they just don't get the same hand of cards at birth.
Right.
And,
that's absolutely
like,
right.
And what do we do? Right? Like, how do we fix that? Because I don't want to live in one of the biggest things that we're dealing with in Canada here. We have massive populations, like specifically in like our indigenous communities that just don't have access to clean drinking water still. Like, I don't want to live in a world like that. Like, that's not fair. Like, this is Canada. Like,
right.
I'm sure you'd say the same thing. Like, this is
absolutely
America. We're not supposed to be like that.
Absolutely.
So it's like, why, like, and I've been just trying to think, like, and you can, like, and, definitely there's like political aspects that influence those things, and it might not be from today. It could be from generations ago. It could be from last generation. It could be, dating back 400 years for you guys. Like, it's kind of different for everywhere, but like, why did this happen? And what can we do about this? Like, how do we fix that?
It's a great question. And, a $1 trillion question. And I think
I'm not
really,
asking you to answer that.
But I think
I'm wrestling with.
Totally. It's a really critical point. And look, I think what I'm hearing, and that's kind of implied, is this idea that in the world in which we live, for better or for worse, and I think for worse, somebody's success is oftentimes at the expense of another person's oppression or compromised, set of opportunities and resources. And, that fucking sucks. And that is,
do you think
a
that's
model
the case across the board, though?
I don't think it's the case across the board necessarily, but I think there are these inherited traumatic sort of intergenerational ideologies that are passed along that sort of connote this idea that in order to get ahead, we have to stomp all over others. And this can be, within, different racial groups, different ethnic groups, different, sort of political groups and ideologies. Can be within a family system. I see this constantly. Sibling rivalry is essentially a kernel of this. I need to suppress the other in order to advance myself. It's why we have different roles within family systems too that are pretty primitive. The hero, the lost child, and I think the just sort of architecture of how we think about success, how we blueprint success, has to change.
Mm-hmm. I think of it as like perhaps that we view success. Well, success is a very vague term because it's different for everybody.
And relative.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, success for me and you is probably different than success for like an Elon Musk or a Jeff Bezos. Like, they have a completely different idea of what success is. But I think like the idea that maybe like success is like there's a finite amount of it out there, because I think in terms of like sibling rivalry, it rings true, like at a large scale, like as above, so below, right? And so like we see that
Mhm.
again, like part of the things that you see in like a federal level for us is like you hear a lot of oppressed groups that kind of, they're almost competing like for who needs to get the attention. And it's like I've been thinking a lot about this recently, and it was like I had this idea. It's like other people that are suffering are not your enemy. Like you don't have to, like, we get like,
Well said.
you know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like it's like we all need help, but like it's just about like what, it's not like there's a finite amount of love out there or a finite amount
Mm.
of compassion. Like we all can receive this. We don't have to
Mhm.
compete for it. Like we all need to get ahead. Like all of us. Like
Yes. I think that's a beautiful thing that you said and really profound, right? Like others who are suffering are not our enemies. We're not in competition with them. I think we sometimes forget this, whether it's within, a broader, sort of sociological standpoint or even within our own relationships, right? We're in many ways all showing up the best way that we know how with the skills that we have access to based on the ideologies and beliefs that we've sort of inherited and have been, fed to learn, right?
yeah, it's funny when you said it, it kind of really clicked for me when you said that about sibling rivalries, because I
Mm.
think about when I was like 5 when my little sister was born, and I remember the feeling, like I physically, like I remember the physical feeling of like, like her getting all the attention. I'm that middle child, so like I dealt with a lot of psychological stuff, but
Mhm.
like watching my little sister, I'm like, why does she get all the attention? Like what, how come, what happened to me? Right?
Yes.
Like I used to be the baby. Now she's the
Yes.
baby. So it's like,
Totally.
and
We
then,
we lose that role of identity. We oftentimes associate, not having something or a deficit in some way as our vulnerability in some way as being the way in which we're able to access whatever support, love, or whatever that we can muster, right? We think we kind of have to be in that position in order to have our needs met in so many ways, right?
yeah. And, it's like if she's getting love and attention, then I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like that's how it felt. Even though that's
Mm-hmm.
not the truth, it felt
Mm-hmm.
like there was like a finite amount of like mom and dad's attention.
And in actuality, there was, right? I mean, unless your parents were the Energizer bunnies, there is only so much energy that we have. Their intention was, I imagine, to love you equally and to show up for you, equally. And at the same time, we're finite in terms of the resources that we have to convey love, convey care, convey importance. It's this idea of we can do anything, not everything.
Yeah.
And it's also an important lesson for ourselves to learn, right? Your sibling, your younger sister, was not the enemy.
Mm-hmm. Well, not that only that, but she had just had different needs. Like I'm 5 years old.
Correct.
Like you don't really need the same attention as a just like a newborn.
Correct. Well, I mean, I think that some 35-year-olds may feel differently, but I hear you. Yes. Correct.
I feel you. Yeah.
Indeed.
I definitely know what you mean there. Because
Yeah.
I think as well, like it has to do, and especially that's kind of like diving more into that. Like I think as well, like as a kid, you don't really understand love language. You don't really understand how that works. So like maybe you're just not getting the attention that you desire, but you're still loved. Like you're still
Mhm.
being loved. It just might not be received, or you might not understand it. Like it's so like someone speaking a different language altogether.
Mhm. It's so well said. And look, I think it's about understanding what our needs are, how to convey them. Obviously, as a 5-year-old, we're unable to do that. We rely on the person who's providing our need fulfillment to tell us what our needs are. And when we grow up in healthy, loving, secure attachment types of families, that's a given. It kind of works automatically. When we grow up in families where there's trauma, abuse, oppression of a variety of different forms, it really fractures in us our ability to have trust because we can't communicate our needs. We don't know what they are. And the people who are responsible for advocating on our behalves are doing just the opposite. So that can affect the way we show up, more with this theme of learned helplessness, this idea that our outcomes are largely, if not entirely, out of our control. It becomes really difficult to reframe our understanding of the world and relationships and trust in general when that initial template is absent.
Yeah. Yeah, because we just kind of like we're craving that. We're looking for that.
Mm,
But then I think it's huge what you're saying about like not really knowing what your needs are.
right.
Because I
Right.
feel like that sometimes even.
Yeah, I think we all do to some extent. We really advocate for our needs being fulfilled. And at the same time, we're not fulfilling our own needs, not because we're, lazy and careless, but oftentimes because we have limited resources and energy. And largely, I think, because we don't really know what those needs are. This idea of love language, at least in America, has become very popularized and kind of like the cultural buzz. But I think it's a bit too finite, a bit too watered down, and it implies that we know how we best and most thoughtfully experience and receive love. We're so intent on telling others, I need this, I need that, I need this, I need that, based on what we see in media or whatever. We really oftentimes don't know what it is that we need and want, and whether the need and want is the same.
Yeah, and I think that and this is just kind of like my I always like try and look at things with a first I agree with it because I do like the idea of like kind of like a love language, but the contrarian way I've looked at it before is I think that it actually can be a gateway for some sort of like kind of sometimes abuse in relationships. Whereas like
Mm,
if someone could be giving their all and then the one partner could just be like, this is what I need from you. And maybe it's like
mhm.
physical affection and they're just trying to force their partner to do certain things. You know what? It kind of
That's
opens a
right.
weird window to
But
that.
you're 100% right. It's kind of like being in a different country and somebody communicating really like fond sentiments to you, but in a language that you don't understand. We are we would probably take out a translator or learn the language or decide whether or not we want to remain in that world based on the lack of language parallels. In relationships, we're kind of in a different country, someone's communicating love to us in a different language, and we're sort of resisting fighting back with them when they may be doing the best that they can. So this dynamic of power differential, power abuse, I think is absolutely a product of this overly kind of like watered down and I think very narrow scope of what it means to express, receive, and show up for healthy love.
Yeah. And I think as well, like, I think that and this kind of pulls on the fact that we're just kind of in like this disposable environment in terms of relationships. Like people are just so quick to just ditch one and then jump into a new one. But I think
Yes.
that it's very difficult. Like I think that you can't really pigeonhole yourself. I think that everyone needs a little bit of every love language. And I think
Yes.
that to pigeonhole yourself and say, like, well, because, like, we've all been in different relationships, right? Like, we've all, and whether you've dated a lot of people or you've just been in like non romantic relationships,
Mm-hmm.
it goes the same way. Like, you've had friends that are gift givers. You have friends that are compliment givers. You have friends that are like the
Mm-hmm.
physical affection. They'll give you a big hug every time you see them. Like, and everyone does have their own love language in that
Mm-hmm.
way. But
Mm-hmm.
then I think that there's no attempt to learn new languages.
Correct. That's absolutely, and it would be the equivalent of me saying the way that I receive love is through, an expensive gift when you come to my home. Well, the person who's coming may not have the ability to afford that. They may not have the resources to make that happen. They may not have access to purchasing goods from the stores that we like because they're not around any of those stores and there's no online shop. So it becomes this very punitive kind of tit for tat entitled wave of really, I think, short-sighted expressions of intimacy. So we have to be really cautious, I think, in this idea. And look, I think it's also part of learned helplessness, this idea that our outcomes are, out of our control in many ways. What we do is we see something as initially not meeting our needs, and then we say, screw it, I'm done here, rather than attempting to communicate and attempting to kind of harmonize the ways in which we're able to access and receive love.
Yeah, and I think as well, like some of the things, like some of the questions I had to ask myself as well when I was looking more into this is more like, why is this something that I gravitate towards? What's the internal feeling I get when I lack this? And what's the
Right.
internal feeling I get when I get this?
Right.
Right. And
Well
then why
said.
is that? And why is
Right.
that? And can I translate that into other languages then?
Right. I think that the second part of that question is so critical. What is it that I lack when I get this? Right. And the truth is that we're going to lack something, especially if we're not open to our own way of communicating love and receiving love from ourselves. And if we're intent on finding the faults and trying to dilute in a very crass way what we are and are not willing to receive, I think we sell ourselves really short.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's so many things I can get in on that because yeah, I know for myself, like I've been more of like the verbal kind of guy. Like I'm definitely like a words of affirmation kind of, that's my like love
Love
language is like
language.
through speaking and also physical affection. I was always like someone that felt awkward giving and receiving gifts. Like that was like one of the things I struggled with for a long time. And I remember through friendships and past relationships, like that was detrimental for a lot of things because I
Yes.
wasn't giving gifts to people that were expecting them or maybe they, there was a mutual agreed upon that I wasn't really communicated properly. And then even receiving gifts, like I kind of, I think back, and this is kind of just me taking accountability for it, and maybe it's like a little step forward or a step too far, but I think back to times where like I didn't really receive a gift with grace, and I think like I kind of robbed that person of a good feeling because they like giving gifts.
Yes, we do that a lot where we'll say, oh, well, thank you so much. I'll open it later. Most people, what they want is they want the experience of, wow, that's so thoughtful. Thank you so much. Right. We want to protect them from our, facial expressions of disappointment potentially, when in reality, they don't care that we like or don't like the gift as much as they care that we acknowledge that they took this step and demonstrated this effort of expressing care or love or validation. And so, in a nutshell, how do we become more skillful at attaching in healthier ways? I think it's to open gifts in front of people who give them to us, right? It's to show up with a gift that's consistent with the idea of sharing and belonging and appreciation rather than the material possession in and of itself.
Yeah, and just for me, like I just had to understand, like, maybe this makes me uncomfortable, like uncomfortable. Like I didn't like the idea of like having someone give me something. I always like, and maybe it's because I grew up in that kind of like blue collar working. Like it was kind of like I felt like I had to give something to receive something, so it felt awkward for me.
Yeah. Well, was it also this idea, I wonder, of what do they want from me? Do I owe them? Is there
Mm-hmm.
this, kind of roster tally in their mind of, okay, I'm expecting something now back from Mark.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. And I felt that way as well. Like this is kind of now we're just deep diving into me, but like I felt like that way as well. Like say for like if it was time to exchange gifts, maybe it's the holiday season or maybe it's like birthday time or whatever. Or I guess birthday might not be applicable, but holiday season would be because you're kind of exchanging gifts. And I kind of always felt like maybe like my gift wouldn't be up to caliber or kind of like, oh, their gift was so thoughtful or mine was just like something funny for me, like,
Well, I do. I think that's why a lot of people hate birthdays. It's less about this idea of, it's another year older that I am, a few more wrinkles, and more this sense of the people who reach out may not always be the people who we want, expect to reach out. and may not feel comfortable receiving that level of acknowledgement and validation for, or we may feel just kind of shitty about ourselves. And the idea of a limelight being on us at a time where we're not feeling great can feel incredibly, painful.
Yeah. Birthdays were always tough for me, actually, anyways,
Me
because
too.
for a long time I struggled with, and I still struggle with, I can't say I'm over it, but just, I guess, grasping the reality of mortality.
Yeah.
And I always just, I think because of that, I've always had a bit of, well, a lot of anxiety surrounding like time.
Yeah.
And like I'm always like I have a bad habit, like I have to turn my phone on silence, otherwise I'm like looking at my phone, looking at the time. I'm like, I like, even subconsciously I'm like, I know that you have to be done by a certain time, so I'm like mindful of that. And
Mm-hmm.
just time, like I feel like always makes me anxious. And I feel like every single year on my birthday I think like, okay, in the last 365 days, what did I do? Did I do anything of meaning? And I think, oh, I wasted all that time. That's why I always
Right.
find myself thinking.
Right. And I think it's so interesting too how this impacts interpersonal relationships. This idea of, did I take up too much of that person's time? What do we communicate when we're late to something? What should we communicate when we show up on time to something? And I think this idea of a wasted life is something that terrifies all of us.
Yeah. And well, and yeah, I guess everyone just kind of values different things, because I know in my heart, and I know like theoretically, I know that it's not the time you spend, it's the value of the time, right? Like you could
Correct.
spend 5 minutes with somebody and it could be like full of ecstasy and love and, compassion, and you could just feel so connected, and it could have felt like it was a 1 second. And then you could
Correct.
spend 3 hours with someone and you're like, holy shit, man, I don't want to
Right.
do that ever again.
Right. And I think, well said, we also believe we owe people our time, that we
Mm.
owe people, a certain commitment. And I can't tell you how many people I work with or just people in my life who will tell me, Josh, I'm just so exhausted and burned out from participating in this interaction with this person. It's not serving me well. And I think it's kind of a disservice to that person and to ourselves to not alter the way in which we show up. I don't believe that we owe anyone our time, right? I think we owe people our honesty and the truth. But time is one of those things that, as Oprah Winfrey says, is the most precious commodity and resource that we have.
Yeah, it's the only thing that can't be bought.
Correct.
Yeah, and man, sorry, I just I wanted to circle back because I know you do have like
Please.
kind of a finite amount of time, but I
No,
want
no,
to
no.
circle
That's okay.
back to just the idea, or like when you're not getting things that you kind of need. So
Yes.
like, I was just thinking, and we kind of talked about this before, but the reason that this has been on my mind for so long is because I've kind of been looking at the state of, Canada, and there's a lot of states that are in the same boat, and I think of, like, how do we get here? Like, how do we get to this point where we're at, today? Like, like where, like, how do we get here? And I think of, well, realistically, I had to remind myself, like, way worse things have happened. Way worse. Like,
Mm-hmm.
World War II was one of the most, like, insane atrocities that I can't even fathom it. And I know, and I've studied so much about it, from what happened in Europe to Asia to North America, and how it impacted everybody. And I think about those atrocities, and I still can't fathom it. I couldn't imagine that.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, when I think about those things, and I think about when I'm already thinking about it in today's terms, when relatively it's not that bad compared to those times. One could argue that it's like we're on like step one of a 20 staircase towards that, but
Mm-hmm.
when I think about those atrocities, I think, the only reason that those are possible is because we have this failed concept or idea or thought that, you know, like people are different than us, or they're worth less than us, or they
Mm-hmm.
add less value to society. Like there's this weird disconnect where we kind of look at another person, and we still do this to this day. And I mean, there's ways that it's useful, but you know, it's frustrating for me, and I'm sure that you feel this even more than I do. The fact that you have to like kind of introduce yourself as a gay man or a straight man. Like, why are we even, you know, like we're the same thing. We might
Mm-hmm.
choose different choices in life, but like at the end of the day, we have a caloric amount that we have to hit. We have to breathe. We
Mm-hmm.
have to, you know, we are the same thing. We have similar
Yeah.
needs. And I just hate that we have this kind of in every way possible. We keep dividing everything between
Yeah.
gender and everything. And it's like, man, like I just feel like the only way these things happen is when that happens, is when we look at
Mm-hmm.
other people and you don't look at, you know, if I were to look at you, I don't see him, you know,
Mm-hmm.
if I don't look at you, I
The
see a
difference in
man.
that way, right?
Exactly. Exactly. You know what I
You
mean?
know, I do. I think um, for me, it's I'm a huge believer that the toughest experiences in our lives make us who we are, you know, that we grow through shit.
I
You
agree.
know, yeah. And to some extent, I, as a kid growing up, you know, I'm 37 years old. As a child, I certainly never envisioned being able to live in a world or, you know, be a person who would be able to look at somebody on a recorded Zoom line and identify as a gay man, being, you know, in a marriage with another man and having bringing a child into the world, and to not have shame totally, you know, permeate every single layer of my psyche. And it's something that I think, you know, because someone pointed that out to me. I was referencing you know, being parents to be, and, you know, we're a same-sex couple and how there's going to be some differences. And someone was like, well, you know, children are the same, like whether you're a child of same-sex parents, you know, an interracial set of parents, a man and a woman, a mommy and daddy, whatever the case may be, the child has the same needs. But I think the way in which we provide care and love and support and the value that we experience from the things in our world are largely rooted in what needs we had deprived from us, you know? So there's something kind of special and unique, and I think, you know, like flavorful on a very deep level about, you know, suffering and hardship and what we do with that, right? Do we turn that into a opportunity to really lean in to showing up for ourselves, for others in unique and profound ways? Or do we kind of say, you know, well, it's not worth it anyway, right? This learned helplessness idea. So I think to a certain extent, need deprivation, you know, really it informs in a very negative way who we are, how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about our own worth. And it can also be an incredibly important taproot from which we feel a greater sense of meaning, purpose, and commitment to showing up for ourselves and others.
Man, just hearing you say that, the very first thing that you said, like the idea that you when you were growing up, you couldn't visualize that without shame. That that
Mm,
that fucking hurts me to hear, man.
yeah, but yeah, and I think one of the things that's so liberating about that is that, for me, is that shame keeps us silent, you know? So the real horror and atrocity when you hear about child neglect and abuse and mistreatment and, you know, bullying and oppression of different sorts is the shame that's inherited and internalized, that one doesn't feel capable or worthy enough of even speaking up and saying, I'm hurt, I'm in pain, I'm suffering, because there's this idea of, you know, sort of worthlessness. So to reclaim our stories and say, that was really shitty, in some ways, I think is a testament to change and growth in a lot of ways. I'm always so encouraged and inspired when people talk about really atrocious things that have happened in their lives, not because I'm like sitting with excitement at learning about this, but because it implies that their shame is no longer at the core of what motivates their ability to show up differently for their lives. When we tell our stories, we reduce shame.
Yeah. I think back to do you know the author Brene Brown?
I do. Vulnerability.
Yeah, I just read her book Daring Greatly,
Mm-hmm.
and that was like kind of a reintroduction to shame, and for me, and it kind of caused me to dig deeper because I can kind of draw similarities to how I felt as a kid, like kind of dealing with like suicidal thoughts and depressive thoughts at a really young age. And I remember voicing them for the first time to one of my teachers, and I remember her appropriate, but not really the reaction I was looking for. And I remember thinking to myself, I better not say anything like that ever again to anybody. And so I can kind of see where you're coming from, but when I hear you say that, it actually fucking hurts me inside. Like when I hear you say that, I think, I hate that. I don't want that. That's not where we need to be like that. But it does give me hope though, because of the fact that, and again, like we haven't really discussed this, but this is my assumption from the outside looking in. It looks like you've kind of overcome that. It looks like, you're feeling comfortable in your own skin with who you are, with who you're with. And
thank you.
And
it's a journey. Look, it's totally a journey. I mean, I remember my nephew who's now 17. I have an older sister, and I think my parents kind of underwent what maybe your grandfather and father did, where they're like, wait a sec, let's give this a second thought before we bring more people into the world. And when my nephew was turning, 13, 14, 15, the age at which my bullying was greatest, I almost had this sort of traumatic recollection, and it was almost this terror of, will I be sort of mistreated or bullied or violated in some way by him? And it's been a really beautiful thing to have had a very different experience,
just dealing with like kind of, because that age I feel like is like the age where you're like educated about these types of things, like sexuality and stuff. And I think that there's this weird, funny gray area in education where, and I think that boys especially are like this, where when you don't understand something, you instantly have to destroy it or make fun of it.
Correct.
And so like, I think that, and that's even something that, again, like growing up in Canada, it's in Vancouver especially, it's very like kind of friendly to that community. Like this is kind of the safe haven of where, like, I know a lot of people that I met growing up where they're like, I came here because I can feel more comfortable here.
Right.
And so
it was a harbor in many ways.
Yeah. And I feel like, so because of that, like I haven't, I didn't view it as the same thing, but just hearing you say that, I can draw parallels, and I'm like, I couldn't imagine how that would feel. Like, yeah. And it just kind of, again, it's the same thing that I was talking about earlier. Like it kind of, the more and more conversations I have like this, like it kind of it doesn't increase like I've always had the tolerance, but just kind of my understanding. And the same thing that you said, just visualizing like a kind of like what it was like to be at a certain age. Like when I hear other people express these things, I think back to, okay, like I remember when I was that age and I was hurting mentally. Like I didn't understand a lot of the things I was going through. I didn't know why, or, and it didn't make sense to like, why keep going then?
Right. But Mark, what you just did that I think is really powerful is that you just made a choice. You made a choice to relate, to extract similarity, right? Because I mean, we have different life stories, we have different life experiences, we have different scripts, but you made a decisive commitment to identify with that feeling of vulnerability, that feeling of excuse me, that feeling of fear, that feeling of why keep going. And I think we tend in general as people to look for differences, to judge reactions rather than to find similarity, relatability, and to connect on the things that are most salient feelings, that sense of loneliness, of despair, of why keep going. So I think universally, if we can get in the habit of identifying with the theme of pain, and just recalling, reflecting upon our own experiences and opting to look for likeness rather than difference, the world's going to be a much different place.
Yeah. And I just feel like, and I don't know if this is like a human problem because it kind of happens everywhere. But I just kind of, I've been thinking so much recently, like, why do we have this kind of intolerance for people that are different than us? Because even like, because the thing that I was saying earlier is like about this like categorization or division in society. I do think it's important to recognize things like, I, as much as I hate labels, because that's the thing I always say is I hate labeling people. I don't like considering somebody like by their sexuality or their race or their
Mm-hmm.
gender. I want to look at them as just a human, and
Mm-hmm.
and it's difficult sometimes, but I try my
Mm-hmm.
best to, because I
Mm-hmm.
know that we all bleed red, we all have X, Y, and Z. There's all these arguments and cheesy things I can say, the cliches,
Mm-hmm.
but it's like like I was saying before, I just view all the atrocities that have happened in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and I think, that's only possible when we lack tolerance for people that are different than us,
I
or that
agree.
we think are different than us.
Correct. I think for me and maybe for others, the reason it's so important to sort of restate and continue to commit to a certain identification, whether it's gay or transgender or Jewish or Black or, whatever the case may be, using pronouns they, them, is we derive value and meaning from the hardship that it takes in getting to a place of being able to shame-free claim a part of who we are.
And
Right. So you're totally right in terms of the universality of human experience. And yet I think some of these identifiers are precious, too.
I do agree with that, because and that's where I was trying to find the words for this, but and it just sounds so funny and cliche, so I'm just gonna say it the way I'm thinking
Just
it right
say
now.
it. Yeah.
But just hearing you say like that story earlier about how you felt as a kid, and then hearing you kind of the way that you speak about it now, it makes it so much more beautiful. Like when I hear about, like, okay, I understand the label. Like I understand that,
Mm,
because it's something that
mm-hmm,
was something that used to hang over your head as like something shameful. And now
mm,
it's like, no, I've come to terms with this and I accept
mm,
it. And whether you accept it or
mm-hmm,
not, this is who I am. And I'm fucking
mm-hmm,
living this way.
mm-hmm,
And if you don't like it, fucking kick rocks, buddy.
mm-hmm.
Like that's it. And so
Right.
I love that aspect of it. Like that makes me
Thank
so
you.
happy, because it's
Yes.
it's kind of like yeah, I think I just there's a beauty behind that.
Mm-hmm,
And I think about it a lot with I think about that a lot with like musicians. Like a lot of people like that I think about that I look up to. I think there's just when I look up to people, I always think about the things that they went through, and I'm like, man, this like that's why I look up to them, because they went through that thing and they're still going.
absolutely. And we relate to the people who overcome obstacles and hurdles. It's not, we all want to show up, quote unquote, perfectly, and flawlessly. And ironically, it's the least relatable, the least meaningful, and the least human way to show up, right? Our struggles, our hurdles, what we overcome is what makes us who we are.
What we overcome is what makes us who we are. Yeah. Yeah, I like that, especially because and it just seems so unfortunate that sometimes, like, because when we overcoming adversity is something that you can take on willingly, right? Like you went to
Mm,
school and you educated yourself about something. That's undertaking, struggling. That's not an easy
mm,
thing to do, but you
mhm,
willingly did it. But I think that the hard part is for people that when they're struggling with something that they didn't choose to, they weren't willingly
Mhm.
accepting that. Like it was just something that like, and again, you know, I'm not speaking from experience, but I don't assume that you got like a character selection at birth and you're like, yep, I choose gay, right? Like
Right.
that's not how I choose.
Totally.
And so like, it's kind of like that was a suffering that you had to do unwillingly.
Mm.
And, there's just kind
And
of
there are
like
people
some,
who can't conceal. I mean, this idea of needing to conceal identity in order to be accepted or not tormented or victimized. You're right. People don't choose, I believe, their gender identity, their sexuality, the color of their skin, their ethnic background, the circumstance of their family systems in childhood, the abuses that they endure. These are not things that we choose,
Mhm.
but we can opt to choose overcoming the idea in our minds that terminal uniqueness, this idea that we're suffering alone, that nobody can relate to us, that is a weapon, rather than trying to find kernels of similarity, a sense of belonging, and capturing our suffering, our pain as an opportunity to grow, to heal, and ultimately to connect. And I believe that that part is a choice.
yeah, yeah, it's almost like just as a full circle. It's like you don't get to choose the hands that you get in the very very beginning, but you kind of, you know, you choose how you use those cards.
That's right.
Man, that I it just, yeah, that's crazy, man. It just, I'm so I'm happy and thankful for this conversation because I feel like
Me
I've kind of
too.
opened my eyes up a lot, but it's just something that I've been playing with. And that's why I messaged you the other day about that. Is kind of like when we don't
Mhm.
have kind of needs that are met, because, you know, say that you repress that side of you,
Right.
that is a huge need that's not being met then.
Correct.
Because like if you can't feel intimacy or romantic or loved or compassion or understood, like that's pretty much all the needs, man. Like
Yeah.
other than
And I and
sustenance.
I totally and I'd feel like a total fraud encouraging other people to live the truest versions of themselves possible, right? To live courageously, not without fear, but living with fear and showing up anyway, as Brene Brown so beautifully talks about in Daring Greatly, and vulnerability being the antidote to shame.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that book helped me out a lot actually. One of the There's so many reasons actually that book helped me out a lot. She's an awesome author, but
She's amazing.
dude, do you have a book? When are you coming out with a book, man?
Listen, I would love to. That's my hope. My hope is to author a book at some point, and I will tell you, maybe in all my sleepless nights as we're raising this infant, I will take some notes. But that's the plan, because I think it's so important for us to tell our stories. Whether we're authors in a very literal sense, or whether we choose to reauthor the course of our lives through showing up differently and with intention and purpose. And you're doing that. And I'm so honored to have had this conversation with you and to see you. And it's been a real joy having this talk. So thank you.
No, dude, thank you. I honestly I was gonna say I appreciate your time, but that's like my subconscious.
Yeah, I appreciate your time.
But dude, I just like having this conversation and just kind of like I'm trying to backtrack and look back on like kind of like I said, these atrocities that we've kind of that society or the world has gone through, because I just want to understand where this kind of like, I guess, lack of tolerance comes from.
Mm,
Because it kind of, it really angers me, and maybe it's
mm,
because I used to be more in that mindset and it's a part of myself that I don't like, but I
yeah.
just, and I was kind of like that in school. Like I wasn't really necessarily like, and you know, from my perspective, I wasn't really like a bully, but I don't think that, I don't think I understood or even tried to understand people. I was
Mm,
just so caught up in my own struggle
mm,
of like dealing with my own mental health that other people's struggles, I was like, in my head, I was like, I'm just trying to survive. So
mm,
I didn't really feel like I had the capacity to try and understand other people.
Right. Relatability is in a lot of ways much more time consuming. It requires more effort, but it also reduces a sense of angst, a sense of disconnection, and a sense of this sort of terminal uniqueness that keeps us in a zone of suffering. You know, it's not an excuse, but it is an explanation that most people who become abusive in some way are themselves survivors of abuse. You know, we look at people who are in these very venomous kind of hate type of cults. And when you ask these people years later, when they've kind of extracted themselves for whatever reason from these, you know, like hate mongering groups, it's this idea of I was in a fractured place. I was so vulnerable. I was lacking a sense of identity and purpose. So I think this idea of the people who cause the greatest suffering are typically themselves suffering greatly helps to capture the humanity in our choices and how we show up for love and lack thereof, you know?
Yeah. And I think that it goes back to kind of like what we were saying earlier is like when you feel like maybe, and like it's kind of a, again, it doesn't really put the right words to it when you say like when you hate yourself, but when you
Mm.
kind of have that void, or you just don't really have that identity, or you don't really know, you know, who you are or what the purpose is, like you kind of start to, you know, not take it out on others, but like just there's this flawed thought that it's like, well, everyone else is kind of doing their thing. And I remember drawing back to like my teenage years. I remember thinking this kind of stuff, like, okay, like everyone seems to be doing their own thing. Like, you know, I was playing sports and I would watch my friends, they all like played sports and they were so happy. And then I'm like coming home on the bus after, you know, practice. And I'm like, why do I feel this like emptiness? Like nothing I can
Mm.
do. And so I remember thinking, you know, I just need to survive. Like, excuse my French, but I was like, fuck these people's problems. Like, I'm
Mm.
dealing with, like, I need to live. That's like
Yeah.
where I was at.
Yeah, you
And,
didn't, the idea of relating, the idea of empathy, compassion, belonging felt, as was the case, totally like just not par for the course. It wasn't on your list of things. It was about pure survival. And
yeah,
yet, I think to be able to survive long term, to be able to show up for ourselves and others and our lives the way in which we want, taking that extra step that actually saves us a lot of years of pain and agony to connect, relate, and empathize can be incredibly healing, you know?
well, and not just that, but it's, I mean, I obviously like this is kind of going to be more biased towards you, but like once I
Mm-hmm.
did seek professional help, once I did go to a doctor and I started to have somebody, like I had, you know, and I talked about this earlier today on a different Zoom call, but I had a really rough experience with the first couple of doctors that I went and saw. Um, you know, but I did eventually find someone that was able to help me. And
Mm-hmm.
when I did, I felt more, hey, I felt that was the first time I felt connected to a doctor. And
Yes.
then I kind of just started to view the world a little bit differently once things started to improve. And I thought,
Yeah.
okay, I can survive now. You know, maybe I got to, maybe I ought to. I remember making an agreement with the universe. I literally remember saying this, and I remember telling like myself this. I thought, you know, if I can survive like a couple more days, like if I can just survive, I will dedicate the rest of this to helping others not feel like that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember thinking that. And so, and just as that ball started getting rolling, like where I started to feel a little bit better, and then that was where I started to be able to empathize with others more and sympathize. Like, okay, maybe, you know, like earlier in the conversation, like maybe I didn't experience what you
Mm-hmm.
experienced, but I can, I've felt the physical sensation before. That
Yeah.
pit in your stomach where you
Yeah.
don't want to leave your room and your hands are shaking and you get cold sweats.
Yeah.
Like I've felt the physiological reaction, and
Yeah.
so I can empathize with that at least. And that was
Yes.
like the starting point for me.
Yep. Huge. And look, and you've proven to honor that commitment. I mean, I don't want to glamorize suffering. I don't want to glamorize being in circumstances of abuse or trauma or oppression. That is not at all the point of what I'm about to say, but I think in so many ways we lean into being really human and helpful and capable of doing incredible things when we can create meaning out of our moments of, real pain. And it's a very fucking hard thing to do, because when we finally are at a point of just experiencing some reprieve, the last thing that we want to do is to reconnect with the pain. We want to turn the chapter. We don't want to look there. We want to, act as if it didn't happen. And I think that in some ways that shortchanges the, sort of lessons that we can learn from our most crippling moments.
Yeah. Well, and not even just that, but I feel like I'm trying to find a way to say this, but I think that all problems are surmountable, but there are some people that have to deal with things that, I can't fathom, maybe you can't fathom, like, like when a parent loses a child, or those dark things that you can't look at a situation like that and be like, there's purpose to this.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like there's this like kind of, maybe you could help someone with that in the future, or maybe you just have this perspective that, because another human might experience this, so like maybe that could be the purpose. But
you're right. I don't pretend to have a monopoly on all the answers, thank goodness. And I would run from anyone who does. I don't understand why certain atrocities happen. And, my sense of faith and belief in some greater good has absolutely, waxed and waned over the years. But what I do know is that for whatever reason, you and I are having this conversation on Saturday, almost afternoon, and we get the chance to really influence and connect. And also for me personally, and perhaps, self-servingly, I feel a greater sense of connection to you, to my humanity, and to, the journey, the good and bad.
Hands down. Yeah, no, I in the essence of time and respect of your time, because this is the third time we'll mention your time. I know you got a jet in a couple minutes, but
Yeah.
I just think that it's so true, because these little conversations, and that flew by actually. Now that I think about it, that
I did. I've been just looking at the time. Yeah, it really did.
That flew by.
Well, we know we're in good company.
Yeah, and well, and normally I have to pee, and so I didn't have to pee.
There we go.
Time,
Maybe it just means you're not hydrating enough, which is a whole other podcast and conversation, Mark.
Yeah.
We're not letting you get away with that one.
No kidding. But yeah, and it's not like you and I are like kind of connecting to solve all the world's problems, but I mean, I think that these types of conversations, like just kind of being able to have these open and authentic conversations where it is just like kind of organic, like I think I don't think it's going to solve the whole world's problems, but I think that a good chat with a good buddy like this, like, is a good place to start. Right?
I couldn't agree with you more.
So I'll let you go, because I know you got a jet by a certain time, but I just want to say thanks, man. That was so wicked, and
pleasure.
Time flew by, but
it really did. And I want to thank you so much for doing what you do, for asking me to be on your show. And I'm honored to connect with you. And let's please stay in touch. Hopefully next time we speak, there's, some further movements with this pandemic. I have hope.
Yeah, we can update people more. But before we go, just kind of give everybody like a little shout out, like to give yourself a plug and tell people where they can find you on Instagram. It's at Therapy with Dr. Josh.
Yep, it's at Therapy with Dr. Josh, DR, and my website is therapywithdrjosh.com.
I love it, man. Thank you so much for your time today, and I appreciate
my
you just coming on and just being vulnerable with me, and just kind of educating me a little bit more, because I really do appreciate that. I think that even though maybe I've heard some of these things before, these ideas before, these concepts, I just think that the more we talk about it, and the more you know, it's not about you saying the idea. It's like you telling me how you experienced it and your feelings behind it. And then I can empathize with that more. So I think that there's something
Absolutely.
powerful behind that.
Yes, we learn much more from stories than we do lessons and ideas, right? So well
Yes,
said.
that's beautiful.
Have a wonderful weekend. I will speak with you very soon, I hope. And thank you again for having me on.
Likewise. Thank you so much, brother.
You
Much
got it,
love.
Mark. Take
Have a good
care.
weekend.
You too. Bye bye.
Bye now.